Welcome to Resilience Development in Action with Steve Bisson. This is the podcast dedicated to first responder mental health, helping police, fire, EMS, dispatchers, and paramedics create better growth environments for themselves and their teams. Let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to Resilience Development in Action. This is episode 245. In episode 244, I talked about my survey and what I got as feedback, what I'm going to do about it. So hope you listen to that and you really enjoy it. But today is a great day because I just went to visit this great treatment center. And I really enjoyed being there. And I know someone who's lived around here. I've known her for a long time, but we haven't had a chance to sit down and do this podcast. And I'm hoping that you guys enjoy her as much as I do. She is always there whenever I call. And she really is someone who can help the first responder world a lot better than many, many treaters I've seen. And I'm going to keep it as nicely as I can. And that's what I'm going to say here. Nikki Mason, welcome to Resilience Development in Action.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited that we get the chance to sit down and chat.
I'm just excited to speak to you because we tend to run by each other.
Yes.
You know, I was up in New Hampshire at the center and we ended up having a great time, but we were like, hey, it's so great to talk to you. Bye. And then we haven't talked until pretty much right now.
Yes. Yes, it's busy.
That's what happens with these relationships you make in this field, in my opinion. What do I know? Well, I feel like I know you. But I think maybe the audience doesn't know who you are. So you want to do a quick introduction as to who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Nikki Mason. I work right now with Granite Recovery Centers as a business development rep. So doing treatment navigation, helping people get into treatment for mental health and addiction services.
Just that.
That's the biggest part of what I do day to day. Yeah, but I'm also a mom. I have 2 little kids at home, which keeps me pretty busy and tied up the rest of the time. Yeah. And then also, just involved in the local community here. I live in Millbury and do a lot with the schools and Girl Scouts and just kind of being a resource wherever I can be a resource.
I think she's selling herself short. I'm going to tell you guys, this woman has been involved when we say in the community. This is a podcast that goes across the world, essentially. Not just your community, but people in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and I know people in Vermont. We just had a conversation about someone in Maryland that knows you, too. And Hannah, if you're listening to it, that's a little comment about you. We'll give you the funny story that goes with that afterwards. But I think that what you got to realize is that you've really made an impact because, there's a few people that I know call you regularly. And those are the people who, they'll call BS right away. And I know you're the type of person that'll call BS right away. So you're really selling yourself short as to how much work you actually do in the community, never mind as a mom.
Yeah.
And a Girl Scout leader and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, I think it's important to really recognize, the BS and call it out. I think that's a big part of what I do on a day-to-day, just kind of in working with various treatment centers, working with different individual clinicians, kind of any resource that you could think of or find. I like to go and check it out. I like to see what it's like. Would I go there? Would I send my loved one there? If the answer is no, probably not going to work with them.
Right. And I think the vetting process is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what people don't realize is that particularly this, I think that in civilian world, we need specific places where we can say yay or nay. But the first responder world, to me, is even more hard and more difficult to handle. And having people who say that they're experts in first responder stuff versus reality are 2 different things.
Yes.
That's just my experience.
Yeah, I think so. And I think on the civilian side as well, but especially for first responders, I think it's very delicate because if, we put our name on someone and I put my Nikki Mason stamp of approval and I say, hey, you can go here. This place is going to take great care of you. And then they get there and it's a disaster. We lost them. And not only did we lose them, they're not going to probably participate in future treatment, but word travels fast. And then, we can lose other people as well that could have potentially gone into treatment, but now their hackles are up and they're not really willing.
And you know as much as I do the business world, right? It's if you like some place, you might tell 3 to 4 people. But if you dislike a place, you'll tell 9 to 12. Is that
Something like that. Yeah.
I don't have
Many more.
I don't have an MBA. I'm just some like therapist, right? But yeah, I think that that's absolutely true, and that's why, like for me, whenever I make a referral, it's usually someone I met, someone I went to, someone I sent, someone who I trust.
Hmm.
But I cannot make a referral though because it's like you said, it's the Nikki Mason stamp, it's the Steve Bisson stamp. It's like you got to be able to talk about it intelligently, or else it's a waste of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're fortunate that we've built trust, throughout the community, and people trust you. People do trust me, and to keep that going, you have to just keep being honest. And, places can change. People can change. I've had places in the past that I was like, maybe that's not my favorite. And things have turned around. And now, yeah, I absolutely would send somebody there and vice versa. So I think it's important to kind of find the connections and then maintain the connections as well.
And that's the hardest part, right? I think that part of what being on this podcast, I tell people it's for me to remember who my resources are. I really think that that's important, but it's really getting those connections. I mean, I try to text, certain people. Joe's been in studio right here with me, and I've texted him a few times just to check in.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the whole Behind the Badge and Beyond group. I got you. Hannah, once in a while, I'll throw in a little, hey, how are you type of thing.
Yep.
But how do you keep up with all that? Because to me, that's the hardest part of my job anyway, is to keep up all those great relationships. I mean, I even think about what I do for a podcast, and Dominique was on the other side that people won't see, but I know her, and I truly love the work she's done. She's done really good, but I barely talk to her. How do you keep it up? How do you keep up all these great things?
It's a lot of driving around in my car and talking on the phone. When I first started working at Granite, I remember my boss told me I was going to have 2 jobs. The first one would be to go out and make the phone ring. And the second one would be to answer the phone when it rings. And that's really what I do. It's a lot of outreach. It's a lot of, physically showing up at places, finding time to just sit down and chat with people, even if it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just that kind of constant outreach and follow up. And then I think, on the flip side of that important piece of responding to people and being there when they reach out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the important part, right? You got to be able to answer the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Just had that conversation this morning with another place where they're like, well, we don't always answer the phone. I'm like, and that is probably why you're not recognized as someone who works in this field.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, it's one of those things where it's something you have to recognize as it could potentially be life-saving. Somebody on the other end of the line, they're not calling because it's their best day. And even if it's a social worker at a hospital or at another treatment center, like they're representing that person, so being available and even if I can't help them right away, at least pointing them to a resource that can. And I think, in my household, it's become very somewhat funny in that anytime my phone rings, my kids will go into like this panic mode of like, someone needs help. Everyone be quiet. Mom needs to help someone. And it's, it's usually like a spam call or something to that effect. It's not that serious, but
Have you checked your life insurance lately?
Yeah. It's just been kind of cute to see that trickle down, to the next generation.
Yeah, well, my daughters have grown through that too. Mm-hmm. And what I find funny today is that they ask me if I can go downstairs. So they don't go quiet. They're like, can you go downstairs? We're watching something. So it's a little different nowadays. They get a little older. They have a different point of view.
Yeah.
But they're used to it. And sometimes I'll take a phone call in the car for XYZ reason. And my daughters know not to talk. And most of them put their earbuds in so I can have a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. We get big on headphones in my house. Some of the conversations aren't necessarily ones I want to have in front of them, but necessary, to have in the moment. So we get creative and we figure it out. It reminds me too, growing up, I come from a first responder family. So my dad was a retired state police lieutenant. My mom was a nurse. Now that, me and my siblings are older, my sister, is a BCBA. My brother is a nurse in the ICU for pediatrics. I think that lifestyle, I guess, has a different flavor to it, at home as well. So.
Yeah. And I think it's funny because all I can think of is a nurse and a police officer. Can you be more stereotypical?
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, just wanted to mention that. Sorry, I'm sure they're happy. I'm just saying. When you said that, I'm like, yeah, I've never heard that story before. But
classic tale.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the other part too. Is the funny part is that I didn't need to tell you what I meant. That is obviously we're laughing here, and we know it's not a stereotype if it doesn't come from something.
Mm-hmm.
But you have your connection with your dad with the first responder stuff. Do you have any, like, besides him or maybe what he's been through or something else? What has made your connection with first responders so important to you and continue to work in this field?
I think being in just kind of the social work, human services world for a long time, I was working in programs that were working with higher acuity clients. When I kind of first started my career, I was working in juvenile detention centers, I was working in locked inpatient psychiatric units, and seeing the trauma that occurs day in and day out in these places, had really gotten me thinking about what's on the other side of that. And, all the helpers are helping day in and day out, but who's helping them? And then going into more community-based work, again, just seeing first responders coming in, law enforcement coming in, EMS coming in, to some pretty treacherous situations. And that's a Tuesday,
Right.
But who's on the backside of that and who's really providing that care? And unfortunately, a lot of the times there's not somebody or something there as a safety net.
Well, or you have someone who doesn't know what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the stuff that is very difficult with, you talked about having, your dad there as a retired lieutenant. Did I get the title right? I'm not good with titles.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, when you have you have that like hands-on experience, which is hard to explain to people. I think that's the other part of being like culturally aware is the word I've come through with a couple of people, because you can't understand unless you've been there and lived it, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I used to think that was BS because I've never had schizophrenia, but I can teach and I can treat people with schizophrenia. But in the first responder world, I think there's a lot of value in having this hands-on, family, friends, neighbors, married to it. I mean, we've had different people on that had that. Just a quick break. Guys, I'm going to talk about a new product that I really like. I actually bought one of their hoodies. It was amazing, and I really enjoyed wearing it. This episode is going to be supported by Deemed Fit. Deemed Fit is a first responder-owned activewear and leisure brand. And one thing that I genuinely like about them is that they support different causes. I actually gave a few people I know who work with first responders or nonprofits their name to Deemed Fit, and I know they're talking to them. They do a lot of initiatives and collections that are based on mental health for first responders. And if you go there right now and you buy anything, including the mental health support stuff, use the code RDA15. That's right, RDA15 to get 15% off on any products that you get. Again, it's called RDA15. Go to deemedfit.com, DEEMEDFIT.com. and enjoy 15% off at checkout to save. Now, right back to the episode. Does that experience also change how you work? Does that change how you treat others? Or does it just like make it another moment for you?
I think it changes the way that I can relate to first responder families, for sure. I think, some of the people that I've spoken with, a lot of times when I'm getting phone calls for somebody, hey, this person, needs help. They need a higher level of care. They need detox, residential, whatever it may be. I've found that I'm often not talking to that individual directly. I'm often talking to a spouse, an adult child, somebody that's close to them that is really kind of driving the bus in terms of them getting some additional help and treatment. We often too will see chiefs, lieutenant, if something's happened at work and people are kind of required, being voluntold for some treatment, even then, it's usually that kind of outside peripheral contact. And I think that being somebody that has a lot of first responders who are very close to me, it has helped me relate with that person, on a more personal level. I think too, it humanizes the work. And, I say to myself, if this was my dad, my brother, my mom, somebody that's very close to me and looking for treatment, how would I want this situation handled, and really kind of putting myself in that spot as well.
And I think that that's the other part too that you just mentioned that's so important is the family. We can talk about the work environment a little later on, but I think that the family is also kind of like, I feel that the only people who get the real story are the family members. I think that with work, you can put on a mask. I think that in social search situations, you can put on a mask, but at home, it's hard to keep up the mask all the time. And I think that, I don't know if you want to talk a little more, but you said, consulting with family members. I think to me, my experience has been that they're the better data collectors than the actual patient sometimes.
Yeah.
Is that your experience or am I completely wrong? And for those of you listening to me and I just said that, write to me if you're not happy, but tell me I'm wrong. Just saying.
No, I absolutely agree. With all of us, it can be hard to reflect on yourself and to notice when you're at a point where you need some help, but the people that are closest to us do see that. I think, especially with our first responders, the culture is that they're the helpers. They're the ones that are taking care of everybody else. And if there's a crack in that, it can be perceived to them at that moment as a sign of weakness or, once the cracks start forming, people get really scared that they're just going to completely fall apart and not be able to pull it back together and do their job and take care of their family and do all the things. So I think that wall comes up as a way for people to really protect themselves, but you can't hide that from the people that are closest to you. And sometimes I think the harder people try and hide it, the more family becomes concerned and starts to see that there's some things going on, that might be an issue. I think with substance use, mental health, they're in the same boat, in the same realm, but can be very different too.
Oh, yeah.
I think especially when it comes to substance use, people seem to have a little bit easier of a time sometimes admitting, yeah, my drinking's gotten a little out of control. I think that can be sometimes an easier conversation to have than
Right.
you seem to be losing a little bit of touch with reality on the mental health side, or, hey, you seem like you're really down, depressed. Are you thinking of hurting yourself? Like those kinds of conversations can be more challenging in my experience to have.
Well, I think it's also kind of like more acceptable for them to have a substance abuse problem.
100%.
Yep. And again, if I'm breaking a wall here, I'm just a drunk or I'm just popping pills or versus, you know what? I think I have PTSD from the 800 events I've seen. That's not going to fly.
Yeah.
Because, like if you have a substance abuse, you don't lose your weapon.
Yes.
But if you have a mental health issue, the first thought is, are they going to take my weapon away?
Yep. And that's often, within the first 5 questions that I'm getting from people is, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my firearm? Are you going to kidnap me away and I'm not going to have control over this situation? Those are the big concerns. Legitimately so.
And it's not like it comes from nowhere because, like, again, we'll get into work, but before, like, I remember, this is not ancient history. I've been only here for 27 years or so. As soon as there was a police officer that had some sort of like just struggling, and this is old school, like I said, it's about 20 something years ago, but the chief right away called to get his gun, his badge, sit, you're on admin leave. And like he like, again, I was a young kid, so I couldn't really say, but in my head, I'm like, it just said that he had a tough time. Why are we doing this? Why are we punishing him for being truthful?
Right.
It happens too often.
Yeah, it does. And I think that is why, across all first responders, law enforcement, fire, EMS, everybody, there's that hesitancy to ask for help. I know recently I just had a friend of mine who's a firefighter sent me a text, "Hey, do you know anyone? I think I should talk to somebody." And for me, I was like, are you okay? Like, do I need to come to your house? Like, this is like huge red flags, because just for them to say that was huge. For
Right.
them to get to the point to reach out to me and say, hey, I think I might need to talk to somebody. That's like, if it had been a civilian, they'd probably already be in a hospital somewhere,
Right.
truly.
Yeah, and I think that's where the fear is too in calling someone. Are they gonna section me? Are they gonna
Yeah.
And you see that all the time, and it's sad because we really have we've created an environment where we're letting these individuals get really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And and there's so many things. I mean, I'm gonna get on my high horse here for a few seconds, but there's wellness visits. There's abilities to get some support. You don't need to wait till you need therapy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the thoughts I regularly share with my chiefs and everyone else when I talk about these programs that they have, you can make it acute stress disorder, which means it goes away 6 months, and it's not like it's completely gone, always there, but it's not overtaking their life.
Mm-hmm.
Or you make it PTSD, and then the treatment's a little more complex, takes a little longer, and will cause other issues in the future. I like the acute stress disorder diagnosis personally.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, we're forced by nature of the work to put these labels on things and, say this is this and this is that. But I think there are so many opportunities, for people to get the help that they need without, having this lifelong label attached and this lifelong stigma attached and losing their firearms and losing their job and losing all these things. There are some pretty low barrier entry points for people to reach out and get help. There's groups, there's one-on-one, there's peers, there's so many things, but it's just helping people to get over that initial internal barrier, I think, is the hardest part.
And I think that that's a good point when you talk about the internal barrier. I think that that's the biggest problem, in my opinion. Sorry. When we talk about those internal barriers, what do we suggest to family members? We talked a little bit of the family earlier. Do we tell the family confront it? Do we tell the family deal with it? Do we tell them call me more often? I mean, how do we deal with that? Because I think family members want to help, but I think sometimes they feel, no pun intended, shackled.
Yeah. I think there is a level of helplessness to it for anybody that has a loved one that, is struggling with substance use, mental health, any of these issues, and I think sometimes we think if we could just hold them down and force them into treatment, then it would make everything go away. But we unfortunately know that that's not really true either.
Right.
So I think it is just kind of staying in frequent contact with people. I'll reach out if I have somebody that, calls and says, I really want my husband to get some help. He's not willing. What do I do? There's ways to kind of introduce the concept. I can be the person to introduce the concept. Hey, I was just talking to this lady, she has some programs. What do you think? Sometimes bringing in that third party, whether it's a person, whether it's a resource, looking something up, the internet has a wealth of everything nowadays, bringing those resources to the individual and saying like, hey, this looks kind of familiar. What do you think? But I mean, at the end of the day, people aren't going to get help until they're ready.
Right.
Or something horrible happens. So,
and I think that you're absolutely right. They won't get the help until something bad happens or the proverbial poop hits the fan.
Yeah. I mean, we see in our program now, I think a lot of times I work, with both civilians and first responders. I think on an average basis, by the time a first responder is reaching out to get help, the acuity level and just everything going on is so much deeper than what we see on the civilian side. I think with the civilian side, people find themselves accessing care one way or another. Could even be through like a visit with their primary care doctor, or,
right.
All these different ways that people can kind of happen across some treatment. Whereas with our first responder population, I think they just wait and wait and wait, and they carry that with them for so much longer than they need to, you know?
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that the reason why I wanted to put this on the podcast is you're right. It's, there's sometimes they get too far, and that makes it even harder when you go to the treatment center, which, by the way, that's why people get to have the recommendation of staying longer. And I tell people that this is I'm saying this on the podcast for two reasons. Number one, reach out for help before it gets bad. Don't wait till everything breaks and then say, okay, I need help. Number two, I think that what I wanted to do with this part too, and I appreciate you kind of you're talking, but I also let me do this, is I want first responders who are listening to this right now, I want them to realize that if they're hurting, their family's hurting too. They may not be saying it, but they see it and they hear it. So that's why I wanted to mention that, because I'm sure you saw it when your family and you've seen it in other families. It's one of those things that they know, so don't pretend they don't, and just be honest with it. So that's why I want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is just so important. People oftentimes when they're hurting, when they're struggling, they get in this silo of this only affects me. But it's just not true. Everybody has somebody somewhere, and the connection, even just with their job, they want to be successful in their role, and go out and keep the community safe, supported, healthy, happy, all those things. And you can't do that when you're not functioning like you should be functioning. You can't.
Well, you can have your cape, Wonder Woman or Superman, but it doesn't protect you from the mental health and psychological pressure that creates.
Yeah.
So you want to stick around for another half hour? Because I think we have a lot more to talk about.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
All right. Perfect. I just want to end this part, and please join us for part 2 with Nikki Mason right after this.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.